All right, today we're diving into a story of some pretty profound personal transformation. It's a journey from one end of the spiritual world all the way to the other, and it's all laid out in the pages of this one really fascinating book. So let's get into it.
So how does this happen? How does a Catholic kid from the American Midwest grow up to become a world-renowned Hindu teacher? I mean, that's the big question we're looking at. It's a journey that doesn't just cross continents, it crosses entire worldviews. From the familiar structure of Western religion to the ancient spiritual paths of the East.
And our guide for this whole thing is David Frawley's own autobiography, How I Became Hindu. So what we're going to do is walk through the key moments of his life, straight from his own account, to try and get our heads around this incredible shift in his identity and beliefs. Okay, so every journey has to start somewhere, right? And for Frawley, that starting point was actually a departure. It meant leaving behind the really deeply ingrained Catholic culture he grew up in, right in the heart of the American Midwest.
And what's so interesting right from the get-go is this huge conflict he describes. On one hand, you've got the official church doctrine he was taught, sin, guilt, purgatory, the threat of eternal damnation. But on the other hand, he talks about this deep, inner feeling he always had. This mystical sense of a higher consciousness, of a universe that was actually good, a sacred mystery he felt even as a little kid.
And this quote from him really just nails that struggle. The whole core theology he was being taught, it just felt alienating to him. The way he puts it, the Christian God wasn't this comforting figure at all. Instead, it was a source of fear and confusion, raising way more questions and anxieties than it ever answered. And that's what really pushed him to start looking for a spiritual connection somewhere else, something that actually matched what he felt inside.
Meanwhile, the world outside the church was offering this powerful alternative. Once he got into public school, his mind just lit up. He was captivated by the sheer vastness of the cosmos he was learning about in science, and the incredibly deep, rich story of ancient history. And all of this new knowledge, well, it made his religious upbringing feel, as he put it, narrow and backward. So, leaving the church wasn't the end of the story, not at all. It was actually the beginning of this really active, almost hungry search for a truth that actually made sense to him, and that's what kicks off the next phase of his journey.
And man, when you look at the timeline, you see just how fast things started moving. At 14, he's done with church. Just 2 years later, at 16, he's deep into existential philosophy. By the time he's 20, he's all in on the yogic path, and by 22, he's a Vedantin. He's accepted Vedanta as his life's philosophy. It was just this period of incredibly rapid spiritual growth. And he was looking everywhere. I mean, this was not a narrow search. He dove into everything. You've got existentialist philosophy, the whole American counterculture scene, mystical European poets like Rilke, Carl Jung's psychology, and then he's exploring Eastern traditions like Taoism, the I Ching, and Buddhist sutras. He was casting a seriously wide net to find some kind of meaning. But here's the real turning point, and he sums it up perfectly himself. After exploring all these great Western ideas, he found them, well, intellectually interesting for sure, but they didn't really offer a clear path to inner peace. But the philosophies of India, he felt they offered something more, a spiritual practice that wasn't just intellectually huge, but was actively aimed at achieving enlightenment and, well, happiness. And that's what brings us to the pivotal moment in his search. That big, wide net he was casting, it starts to narrow. He begins to focus in on the most ancient spiritual texts of India, the Vedas. So as he's immersing himself in Vedanta, that's the philosophy that comes from the Upanishads, kind of the final philosophical part of the Vedas, he comes across the teachings of a sage named Ramana Maharshi. And for Frawley, this guy wasn't just another teacher. No way. He saw him as the ultimate model of enlightenment, a modern person who seemed to be the living, breathing embodiment of the self-knowledge that Frawley was so desperately seeking. But it was another figure, Sri Aurobindo, who ended up holding the key. Frawley was just blown away by Aurobindo's intellectual power. He described his mind as being like this vast open sea. And it was through reading Aurobindo that the deepest, most ancient texts, the Vedas themselves, were finally going to open up for him. And yeah, reading Aurobindo's work led to an experience that would change absolutely everything. It was this moment of pure revelation, one that would define the entire rest of his spiritual life.
So get this, he's on a bus, late at night, reading Aurobindo's Secret of the Veda, and suddenly something just clicks. He calls it a Vedic epiphany. All of a sudden, these ancient texts weren't just old, dusty poetry. They came alive. He could feel them as a living force, like he was sensing the evolution of consciousness itself. It was this wisdom that was in all of nature, and he realized it was an inextinguishable flame right at the very core of what it means to be human.
So after years and years of studying, the journey had to become, well, real. The next phase had to take him away from the books and the ideas and into the direct, lived experience of India itself.
And his first trips there were completely transformative. He talks about it like it was a journey through time, a direct face-to-face encounter with this ancient spiritual culture he'd only read about. And just like that, all that abstract knowledge became a tangible, living, breathing reality for him.
And while he was in India, he had an encounter that went way beyond philosophy. It was raw, powerful, and totally unexpected.
So while he was at the ashram of Ramana Maharshi, he wasn't just finding some peaceful spot to meditate. He says he encountered what he could only describe as a primordial power, the Hindu deity Skanda, the child of fire. And let me tell you, this was not some gentle intellectual insight. This was an intense spiritual fire that he felt was demanding the death of his ego, demanding a complete and total spiritual rebirth.
So where does all this lead? Let's get to the conclusion of his journey and really look at how he came to understand what it actually means to become a Hindu.
And that's really the core question his whole book is trying to answer. But his answer, it basically challenges the entire Western idea of what religious conversion even is. In fact, he calls that word, conversion, a misnomer for what happened to him.
Okay, so the key to understanding this is the concept of Dharma. He explains that for him, Hinduism isn't about, signing up for a new creed or following a new prophet. It's about recognizing Dharma, which is like a way of life that's aligned with the cosmic law of the universe. It's a system that has room for many, many different paths to the truth.
So for Frawley, becoming a Hindu was really an act of self-discovery. It wasn't about converting to some foreign belief system. It was about recognizing a truth that he felt was already inside him all along. It's a path of self-knowledge. It's about developing respect for all beings. And it's about discovering that divine presence not in some old book or a church, but inside yourself. And he leaves us with this one last, pretty powerful thought. He kind of frames his own personal journey as something that matters for all of us. He suggests that until we, as a culture, reconnect with these deeper spiritual impulses, we're going to stay immature as a species. And we'll have a culture that, for all its amazing technology, just leaves us unhappy and spiritually destitute. Wow, that's a really powerful idea to end on.